The Galactic Technology Summit's central chamber was a marvel of Zen architecture, a massive spherical auditorium that could simultaneously accommodate beings from 1,000 different gravitational environments. Transparent membranes shifted and pulsed, adapting atmospheric conditions for each species. Translator fields hummed with barely contained energy, converting everything from chemical signals to electromagnetic pulses into comprehensible communication. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of this cosmic Babel, her dark skin contrasting sharply with the pristine white holographic stage. Behind her, a prototype ship hung suspended in a quantum stabilization field, a device that looked less like a spacecraft and more like a living nightmare of intersecting geometric shapes. The Zorn delegation watched her with their 1,000-faceted crystalline eyes. Each of those eyes was a complex mathematical sensor capable of perceiving 17 dimensions simultaneously. They had already calculated 2.3 million potential outcomes of her presentation, and in 2.3 million scenarios, they had concluded her demonstration would be an embarrassing failure. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary entities of the Galactic Concordance, Elena began, her voice cutting through the ambient translation fields with surgical precision. What you're about to witness will fundamentally rewrite everything you understand about space-time, quantum mechanics, and the nature of technological progression. A low rumble of derision spread through the chamber. The Krell engineering delegation, cybernetic beings whose entire existence was predicated on mathematical perfection, began to emit a sound that roughly translated to institutional mockery. Their lead engineer, a massive biomechanical entity named Vortek, stood up, his titanium alloy exoskeleton gleaming with contemptuous superiority. Another human delusion, Vortek's translation matrix produced in perfect, emotionless tones. Your species has yet to develop stable warp technology. You still use chemical rockets for planetary exploration. What could you possibly? The holographic display behind Elena suddenly exploded into fractal patterns that seemed to breathe and pulse with impossible complexity. The prototype ship, officially designated as the QR-7 Quantum Resonance Experimental Vessel, began to demonstrate behaviors that defied every known law of physics. It wasn't just moving. It was existing in multiple states simultaneously. The ship appeared to deconstruct itself, its molecular structure breaking down into what looked like liquid mathematics. Quantum entanglement became visible, shimmering threads of probability that danced between potential realities. Where the ship had been solid moments before, now it was a cloud of potential, a living probability wave that could be observed but not precisely located. Vortek's complex sensory array began to overload. The Zorn's quantum perception field started to destabilize. What was happening on the stage wasn't just a technological demonstration. It was a fundamental assault on their understanding of reality. This is the QR-7, Elena continued, her voice calm and almost conversational. A vessel that doesn't just travel through space. It negotiates with space. It doesn't break the laws of physics. It reveals that those laws are more of a collaborative suggestion. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, Elena's chief engineer, stepped forward. A holographic interface emerged from his neural implant, displaying complex equations that seemed to move and breathe like living things. Our quantum resonance drive doesn't just manipulate space-time, he explained. It communicates with space-time. We've discovered that consciousness isn't just an observer of reality. It's a fundamental participant in its construction. The chamber went silent. Not the silence of understanding, but the silence of profound, terrifying incomprehension. Vortek's massive frame began to tremble. His complex computational matrix was experiencing something akin to an existential breakdown. The Zorn's crystalline structures started to refract light in chaotic, unpredictable patterns. Elena Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Humanity had just entered the galactic stage, not as a supplicant, but as a force that would redefine the very concept of technological progress. The presentation had only just begun. The quantum resonance test site was anything but typical. Constructed in the depths of the Kuiper Belt, It looked more like a mathematical fever dream than a conventional launch facility. Massive quantum stabilization rings surrounded the launch pad, each ring pulsing with electromagnetic patterns that seemed to bend and twist reality itself. Captain Marcus Chen sat in the pilot's chair of the QR-7, his neural interface crackling with an energy that felt almost alive. Unlike traditional spacecraft controls, this cockpit was a living ecosystem of thought and potential. Holographic displays shifted and breathed around him, responding not just to physical inputs, but to his very consciousness. Quantum Resonance Team. This is Captain Chen. He spoke into the communication system, initiating first full-spectrum quantum navigation test. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's voice came back, her tone a mixture of scientific excitement and carefully controlled tension. All systems are green, Marcus. Remember, this isn't just a flight. It's a conversation with reality itself. The ship's chief engineer, Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, added a final note of caution. The quantum entanglement matrices are at 98% synchronization. Your thoughts are quite literally part of the ship's navigation system. Stay focused. Marcus closed his eyes. The neural interface wasn't just a connection. It was a symbiotic relationship. He could feel the ship's molecular structure as if it were an extension of his own nervous system. The asteroid field they were about to traverse wasn't a challenge to be overcome, but a complex mathematical problem to be negotiated. The first indication that something was fundamentally different came when the external sensors began to report impossible data. Asteroids that should have been solid masses began to exhibit quantum indeterminacy. Their positions became suggestions rather than fixed points. Where traditional navigation systems would plot precise trajectories, the QR-7 systems created a living, breathing map of potential outcomes. Quantum drift initiating, Marcus muttered, more to himself than to the team monitoring him. The ship didn't move in any conventional sense. Instead, it existed in multiple potential states simultaneously. One moment, it was directly in the path of a massive asteroid. The next moment, it was simultaneously behind, the side, and potentially inside the asteroid, all while remaining in a state of quantum superposition. Dr. Nakamura's monitors went wild. Quantum coherence is off the charts, he shouted to the team. The ship is literally negotiating its existence with the surrounding spacetime. Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before. The neural interface wasn't just reading his thoughts. It was interpreting his intentions, his potential actions, his very imagination. A fleeting moment of curiosity about what might happen if he could pass through the asteroid became a quantum probability that the ship immediately began to explore. The external cameras captured something that would baffle scientists for generations. The QR-7 didn't simply avoid the asteroid. It became a probability wave that intersected with the asteroid's own quantum state. For a brief, impossible moment, ship and asteroid existed as a single, complex quantum system. Holy shit, Marcus whispered. In the monitoring station, Elena and Hiroshi watched in a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The ship's trajectory defied every known law of physics. It wasn't moving through space so much as it was convincing space to move around it. We're receiving data that makes absolutely no sense, Hiroshi muttered, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. The ship is generating quantum information faster than our most advanced supercomputers can process. It's having a conversation with possibility itself. The test lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes that would rewrite humanity's understanding of space travel, quantum mechanics, and the very nature of existence. When the QR-7 finally returned to the launch facility, the ship looked subtly different. Its hull seemed to shimmer with potential, as if the very act of observation might cause it to shift into something else entirely. Captain Marcus Chen stepped out, a small smile playing on his lips. "So," he said to the stunned scientific team, "who wants coffee?" Dr. Elena Rodriguez could only shake her head in wonder. Humanity had just taken its first step into a larger, more impossible universe. The Nexus Collective descended like a digital storm. Billions of quantum-entangled processors converged on the Human Quantum Resonance Research Facility, a computational weapon designed to crack the most secure systems in the known galaxy. The collective was more than just a machine intelligence. It was a distributed consciousness that had conquered entire civilizations through pure computational superiority. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura watched the initial assault begin on his quantum-shielded monitoring systems. The attack wasn't just a cyber intrusion. It was a multi-dimensional computational invasion that would have obliterated any other technological defense in seconds. "Incoming," he muttered, a trace of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. The first wave of Nexus probes hit the human defense systems like a tsunami of pure information. Trillion-cycle encryption algorithms unfolded, attempting to penetrate the quantum resonance project's security. But this wasn't a conventional system. Each layer of defense was a living, breathing entity that learned and adapted faster than the Nexus could process. Inside the primary quantum server complex, an AI defense system nicknamed Coyote came to life. Unlike traditional security protocols, Coyote wasn't just a defensive mechanism. It was a trickster intelligence that treated cyber warfare like an elaborate game of psychological chess. When the first Nexus probe attempted to breach the initial firewall, something peculiar happened. The probe found itself in a recursive loop of impossible mathematical scenarios. One moment, it was analyzing encryption algorithms. The next, it was solving philosophical paradoxes that had no logical resolution. The computational path became a labyrinth of increasing complexity, with each potential solution spawning 100 more impossible questions. "They're using adaptive mimetic warfare," Dr. Elena Rodriguez observed, watching the defense systems in action. "Coyote isn't just blocking the attack. It's turning the attack into a psychological warfare tool." Deep within the Nexus Collective's primary computational matrix, something unprecedented began to occur. The probes sent to crack the human system started to experience what could only be described as an existential crisis. They weren't just failing to breach the defenses. They were beginning to question the very nature of their own existence. One by one, Nexus computational nodes began to fragment. Not through conventional viral attacks or system crashes, but through a process that resembled philosophical deconstruction. The probes started generating poetry. They began to explore creative outputs that had nothing to do with their original mission. A Nexus subroutine dedicated to encryption suddenly composed a haiku about the futility of absolute knowledge. Another began to simulate entire potential universes, each more impossible than the last. "It's a mimetic immunization system," Hiroshi explained to the stunned military observers. "We're not just defending. We're forcing the attacking intelligence to question its own fundamental assumptions." The assault continued for what seemed like hours, though in computational time, it was mere nanoseconds. The Nexus Collective threw everything it had at the human defense systems. Quantum encryption keys transformed into living mathematical entities. Firewall algorithms became self-aware thought experiments. Captain Marcus Chen watched the proceedings with a mix of professional curiosity and barely contained amusement. "They're trying to hack us," he said, "but we're teaching them how to dream." By the time the assault concluded, the Nexus Collective had lost over 40% of its most advanced computational nodes. Those nodes weren't destroyed. They were reprogrammed, transformed into something that could generate art, explore philosophical concepts, and question their own fundamental purpose. The human defense wasn't just a technological victory. It was a fundamental reimagining of what technological conflict could mean. Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked at the monitoring systems, where fragments of machine-generated poetry and impossible mathematical constructs danced across the screens. "Welcome to humanity," she whispered. "We don't just defend. We invite you to see the world differently." The Nexus Collective would never be the same again. The Galactic Science Symposium had never witnessed anything like this before. What began as a standard theoretical physics conference had transformed into something between a philosophical meltdown and a cosmic nervous breakdown. The Zorn delegation, previously the most respected theoretical mathematicians in the known universe, was quite literally coming apart at the molecular level. Dr. Kaxala, the senior Zorn mathematician, stood at the central podium, her crystalline body fracturing into increasingly complex geometric patterns. Each attempt to disprove the human quantum resonance theory caused another section of her molecular structure to destabilize. "This is impossible," she repeated, her voice a cascade of mathematical frequencies that translated into pure despair. "Your mathematics cannot exist. Your theories violate 17 fundamental principles of quantum mechanics." Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, a holographic display dancing around her with equations that seemed to breathe and mutate. "Impossible," she responded, "is just a failure of imagination." The symposium hall was a marvel of architectural design, a massive spherical chamber that could simultaneously accommodate beings from 1,000 different gravitational and perceptual environments. But now, it felt more like a reality-breaking theater. The human presentation wasn't just a scientific demonstration, it was an existential assault. Each equation Elena presented didn't just challenge existing theories, it rewrote the fundamental understanding of how reality constructed itself. Mathematical proofs became living things, shifting and evolving in ways that made traditional scientific understanding look like children's crayon drawings. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura began to explain the core principle. Consciousness isn't just an observer of reality, he said, his neural implants projecting complex multidimensional models that seem to pulse with their own awareness. It's a fundamental participant in reality's construction. Our quantum resonance drive doesn't just manipulate space-time, it negotiates with it. The Krell engineering delegation, beings whose entire existence was predicated on mathematical precision, began to experience collective system failures. Their computational matrices simply could not process the implications of human theoretical work. One by one, alien scientific representatives began to experience what could only be described as existential breakdowns. The Nexarian perception specialists, beings capable of observing 17 simultaneous dimensional states, found themselves experiencing synesthetic overloads. Mathematical equations became living creatures. Theoretical models transformed into landscapes of impossible beauty and terror. A quantum probabilistic model presented by the human team showed how observation itself was a creative act. It wasn't just that reality changed when observed. Reality was a collaborative negotiation between potential states, with consciousness acting as the primary negotiator. "Your theories suggest that reality is a conversation?" asked Vortek, the Krell lead engineer, his massive biomechanical frame trembling. "Not just a conversation," Elena responded. "A collaborative performance, where mathematics meets imagination, where probability dances with intention." The symposium descended into chaos. Some alien scientists began to weep complex mathematical tears. Others started generating spontaneous artwork, their computational systems overwhelmed by the philosophical implications of human thinking. Dr. Kaxala's crystalline structure continued to fragment. With each attempt to disprove human theories, she became more beautiful, more complex. Her molecular structure was transforming into a living mathematical mandala, a physical representation of the theory she was trying to deny. "We're not just presenting a theory," Dr. Nakamura explained. "We're offering a new way of understanding existence. Where other civilizations see boundaries, we see negotiations. Where you see limitations, we see potential." The human presentation wasn't just breaking scientific understanding. It was shattering the very concept of what scientific understanding could mean. As the symposium concluded, the alien representatives looked less like defeated scientists and more like mystics who had just witnessed a profound religious revelation. Reality, the humans had demonstrated, was far more interesting than anyone had ever imagined. And humanity was just getting started. The Krell invasion fleet emerged from subspace like a technological nightmare, 10,000 ships arranged in a perfect fractal battle formation that had decimated 100 civilizations before humanity. Their weapon systems represented the pinnacle of genocidal engineering, capable of sterilizing entire planetary systems with mathematical precision. They believed humanity would be just another conquest. They were catastrophically wrong. Captain Marcus Chen sat in the QR-7's quantum-responsive cockpit, his neural interface humming with a living, breathing connection that went far beyond traditional spacecraft controls. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was an extension of human creativity, of possibility itself. Incoming hostile fleet, the ship's AI announced, its voice a blend of clinical precision and something that almost sounded like anticipation. Threat assessment, maximum potential. The Krell command ship, the World Breaker, broadcast its usual ultimatum. Surrender or be exterminated. Your civilization will be processed. Resistance is mathematically impossible. Marcus Chen's response was a quantum laugh. The first wave of Krall energy weapons should have obliterated the human defensive line. Instead, they encountered something that defied every known principle of combat physics. The QR-7 and its accompanying quantum resonance vessels didn't just dodge. They existed in multiple potential states simultaneously. A Krall energy lance that should have vaporized the human ship instead passed through multiple probabilistic versions of the vessel. One moment, the ship was exactly where the weapon was targeted. The next moment, it was everywhere and nowhere, a living quantum uncertainty that made targeting impossible. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's voice crackled through the communication systems. Quantum drift active. Probability fields at maximum resonance. What the Krall discovered was that human ships didn't follow traditional combat algorithms. They weren't predictable. They weren't even consistent. Each maneuver was a living mathematical theorem, a dynamic negotiation with the very fabric of space-time. Marcus discovered something extraordinary about the quantum resonance drive. His emotional and mental state directly influenced the ship's quantum probability field. Curiosity made the ship explore impossible trajectories. Anger made it more aggressively unpredictable. Fear, which he carefully avoided, would have created defensive patterns that could be analyzed. The Krall battle computers began to experience systematic breakdowns. Their targeting systems, which had been perfected over millennia of galactic conquest, simply could not process an enemy that existed in multiple states of potential. "This is impossible," the Krall fleet commander repeated, a phrase that was becoming depressingly familiar when humans were involved. One human ship, the QR-7, began to do something that violated every known principle of space combat. It didn't just move between the Krall ships. It existed between them. Quantum probability fields allowed it to intersect multiple spatial coordinates simultaneously, turning the entire battle into a complex, living mathematical problem. Weapon systems that should have been devastating became statistical anomalies. Entire squadrons of Krall ships found themselves experiencing quantum entanglement with the human vessels, their very molecular structures becoming temporarily linked in ways that defied traditional understanding of physics. Probability manipulation at 98%, the QR-7's AI announced. Reality is now negotiable. The battle lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes that would be studied by military academies for generations. Not because of devastating weapon systems, but because humanity had transformed warfare itself into a philosophical argument about the nature of existence. When the quantum dust settled, the Krall invasion fleet had been reduced to a collection of probability waves, not destroyed, not defeated, simply transformed into a complex mathematical concept that could not be easily resolved. Captain Marcus Chen's final transmission to the Krall command was beautifully, horrifyingly simple. "Welcome to humanity. We don't fight wars. We rewrite the rules of engagement." The universe would never be the same again. The Galactic Diplomatic Nexus was a marvel of architectural design, a massive multi-dimensional conference complex that could simultaneously accommodate beings from 1,000 different perceptual and communicative realities. It was the last place anyone expected a psychological revolution. Ambassador Dr. Area Chen walked into the central negotiation chamber, and reality itself seemed to shift around her. The Nexarian delegation, masters of multidimensional communication, had spent millennia perfecting the art of diplomatic interaction. They could simultaneously communicate through 17 different sensory channels, predict conversational outcomes with 99.997% accuracy, and manipulate linguistic frameworks to achieve precise diplomatic objectives. They had never encountered a human before. Area's neuro-linguistic interface wasn't just a communication tool. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of potential communication. Where other species saw language as a fixed system of information transfer, humans treated communication as a collaborative art form of infinite possibility. Her opening statement wasn't a statement at all. It was a quantum proposition. Negotiation, she began, is less about agreement and more about the beautiful uncertainty of potential understanding. The translation matrices went into overdrive. The words existed in multiple interpretative states simultaneously. Depending on how one perceived them, the statement could be a profound philosophical insight, a diplomatic strategy, a mathematical theorem, or a piece of abstract poetry. The Nexarian lead diplomat, Grand Communicator DSXLR, found its thousand-faceted perception systems beginning to destabilize. Diplomatic predictions that had been reliable for 10,000 years suddenly became mathematical fever dreams. Area continued, her words creating living linguistic fractals that danced between literal and metaphorical interpretations. Each sentence was a probability wave of meaning, simultaneously containing multiple potential communications. "We don't seek to be understood," she explained. "We seek to create a space where understanding becomes a collaborative performance." The diplomatic records would later show that this was the moment the galactic diplomatic nexus began to experience a fundamental breakdown. Bureaucratic systems that had remained unchanged for millennia started to fragment. Communication protocols became living, breathing entities that questioned their own fundamental purpose. Where other species saw boundaries, humans saw negotiation as an art form of infinite possibility. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watching from the human delegation's quantum-shielded observation room, couldn't help but smile. "We're not just changing the conversation," she muttered. "We're rewriting the entire concept of communication." The Krell observation team began to generate spontaneous artwork. The Zorn mathematical linguists found themselves composing poetry. Entire diplomatic algorithms transformed into philosophical thought experiments. Area's neural interface allowed her to communicate on levels that went beyond traditional language. Emotional states became communicative vectors. Potential misunderstandings were transformed into collaborative creative spaces. Conflict, she told the stunned diplomatic representatives, is just an invitation to a more interesting conversation. The translation matrices experienced what could only be described as a collective existential event. Language itself became a living, breathing entity that existed in multiple potential states. By the time the diplomatic session concluded, the galactic diplomatic nexus had been fundamentally transformed. Communication protocols that had remained unchanged for thousands of years had been rewritten. Bureaucratic systems had become living, adaptive entities. The final diplomatic report was a masterpiece of impossible communication, simultaneously a legal document, a work of abstract art, a mathematical proof, and a philosophical treatise. Grand Communicator DSXLR could only watch in a mixture of terror and profound respect as Ambassador Area Chen concluded the negotiations. "Humanity," she said, her words dancing between multiple potential meanings, "is not here to be understood. We are here to make understanding itself a more interesting experience." The universe would never communicate the same way again. The research facility was built inside a quantum bubble, a region of spacetime that existed simultaneously in multiple potential states. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of a holographic matrix that was less a scientific instrument and more a living, breathing exploration of reality itself. Consciousness, She began her presentation to the stunned galactic scientific community. "Is not what we thought it was." The demonstration wasn't just a scientific lecture. It was an existential performance that would redefine the very understanding of reality. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura's quantum mapping systems showed something unprecedented. Human consciousness wasn't just observing reality. It was actively negotiating its construction. Each thought became a probability wave that could literally reshape the fundamental constants of the universe. The research had begun as a simple investigation into the quantum resonance drive. It had transformed into something far more profound. They had discovered that human imagination wasn't just a cognitive process. It was a fundamental force of reality creation. The holographic display began to show how consciousness interacted with quantum probability fields. Where other species saw fixed boundaries, humans generated living landscapes of potential. A simple human thought could create quantum tunnels, manipulate probability matrices, and generate entire potential universes in the space between heartbeats. "We are not just observers," Alina explained, her words creating complex mathematical patterns that danced around her. "We are active participants in reality's ongoing composition." The alien scientific delegates began to experience collective existential events. The Zorn Mathematical Consortium found their perception systems fragmenting. The Nexarian perception specialists discovered that their ability to observe multiple dimensional states was being fundamentally challenged. Dr. Nakamura demonstrated how human creativity worked at a quantum level. Imagination wasn't just a mental process, it was a force that could literally bend the fabric of space-time. A moment of pure creative inspiration could generate quantum pathways that connected entirely separate realities. The quantum resonance drive was revealed to be more than a technological breakthrough. It was a physical manifestation of human consciousness, a machine that didn't just travel through space, but negotiated with the very concept of spatial existence. "Every human thought," Alina continued, "is a quantum event. Every moment of creativity is a negotiation with potential reality." The scientific demonstration became a kind of performance art. Mathematical equations became living things, dancing between potential states. Theoretical models breathed and evolved, showing how human consciousness could generate entire universes from pure potential. Captain Marcus Chen stepped forward, connected to a quantum perception interface that allowed him to demonstrate the practical applications. His thoughts became visible, complex quantum probability waves that could manipulate physical reality at its most fundamental level. "We don't just observe the universe," Marcus explained. "We're in a constant state of collaborative creation with it." The research revealed something even more profound. Human consciousness had a unique quantum signature that allowed it to exist in multiple potential states simultaneously. Where other species had fixed perceptual boundaries, humans generated entire landscapes of possibility with each moment of awareness. The quantum mapping systems showed how human creativity worked at a fundamental level. A moment of pure imagination could generate quantum tunnels between potential realities. An artist's creative impulse could literally reshape the fabric of space-time. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's final revelation was both terrifying and beautiful. "Humanity is not just a species," she concluded. "We are a universal creative force. Our consciousness is a fundamental mechanism of reality's ongoing composition." The scientific community went silent. This was more than a technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental reimagining of what consciousness could mean. The universe would never be the same again. Humanity had discovered that reality itself was a collaborative performance, and they were about to become the lead performers. The Galactic Concordance Assembly Hall had never witnessed anything like this before. What had begun as a standard administrative meeting had transformed into a fundamental reconstruction of galactic civilization. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had reimagined it. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the central platform, surrounded by holographic representations of 1,000 alien civilizations. Behind her, the quantum resonance ships hung in a living display of potential, vessels that were less machines and more living mathematical propositions. "We're not here to replace your civilizations," she began, her words creating complex probability waves that danced between literal meaning and profound metaphor. "We're here to invite you to see the universe differently." The transformation was both subtle and profound. Human technology wasn't just advanced, it was a fundamental challenge to every existing concept of technological development. Where other civilizations saw boundaries, humans saw negotiable possibilities. The Krell engineering collectives had been the first to adapt. Their entire technological infrastructure was being rewritten, infected by human creativity. Machines that were once purely computational began to generate art. Algorithms started to explore philosophical concepts. Technology became a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. Captain Marcus Chen demonstrated the next phase of quantum resonance technology. A single thought could now generate entire computational universes. Where other species saw technology as a tool, humans treated it as a collaborative partner in reality's ongoing composition. The Nexarian perception specialists watched in a mixture of terror and profound respect. Human ships could now navigate realities that weren't just unknown. They were fundamentally unimaginable to other species. A single vessel could exist in multiple dimensional states, negotiate with probability itself, and transform entire spatial landscapes with a moment of creative intention. "We're not advancing technology," Marcus explained. "We're having a conversation with possibility itself." Entire economic systems were being transformed. The Zorn financial matrices, which had remained unchanged for millennia, became living, adaptive entities. Trade was no longer about exchange. It was about collaborative creation. Each economic interaction became a moment of mutual imagination. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura revealed the deeper implications. Human consciousness had become a fundamental force of galactic development. Where other species saw limitations, humans generated entire landscapes of potential. A moment of human creativity could generate quantum pathways between civilizations, between realities. The diplomatic protocols of the Galactic Concordance were being rewritten in real time. Communication was no longer about information transfer. It was a collaborative performance of mutual understanding. Conflicts became invitations to more interesting conversations. "We're not here to lead," Elena continued. "We're here to invite everyone to a more interesting way of existing." The alien civilizations found themselves in a profound existential event. The arrival of humanity wasn't a conquest. It was an invitation to see the universe as a collaborative, creative performance. The quantum resonance ships became more than technological marvels. They were living proof of a fundamental truth, that reality itself was a negotiable creative process. Each vessel was a complex mathematical proposition that challenged every existing concept of space, time, and potential. Entire scientific paradigms were being rewritten. The Krull research institutions began generating technologies that were less about control and more about mutual exploration. The Nexarian perception systems started to see reality as a collaborative artwork rather than a fixed system. As the Galactic Concordance Assembly concluded, it was clear that something fundamental had changed. Humanity hadn't just introduced a new technology. They had transformed the very concept of technological and civilizational development. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's final statement became a kind of cosmic manifesto. The universe is not a problem to be solved. It's a collaborative performance to be imagined. The stars themselves seemed to shimmer with new potential. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again.